Welcome to Speak as One. I'm Julie Coriath. Today we have with us Fiona Dawson. Fiona is the founder and the director of Free Lions Production. Hi, Fiona.
Hey, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the many things that you do. So I'm only saying Free Lions Production, but there's so much more. Can you tell us a little bit about everything that you're doing right now?
Sure. Yes, okay. I'd be delighted to. Delighted to tell you all.
Yes.
So Free Line Productions is my company, and under that we have 6 branded verticals of Now with Fiona content. So I know that sounds like a lot. But so we have, we do unscripted TV. I'm known for my documentaries. I am working on an unscripted TV show, and that's kind of like the slow burn that will eventually get picked up. And then in the meantime, the 2 things that keep me the busiest are currently doing storytelling explainer videos, primarily for corporations, but we've also been working for Equality Texas to help diversity, equity, and inclusion training programs be more effective. Because studies show that corporate DEI programs, a lot of people just like roll their eyes and they think that someone's just ticking a politically correct DEI box. And what we do is tell very intimate stories about the employees to be able to relate to different topics within DEI. So there's that. Do speaking engagements, like Pride is coming up, going to be a busy month.
It is.
September is Bisexual Awareness Week, and so that's a good time for me to go out and do the speaking circuit. I have a podcast as well. I have a book, and then eventually we're going to be developing a merchandise line. Right now we've had a couple of different things, but I'd love to have some content that shares my message of hope, love, and positivity. We share Lionheart stories, who are people who are doing kind and courageous things, and everything is about positive and empowering stories, primarily from the LGBTQ plus community, but also kind of covering the spectrum of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So,
how do you do it all?
Because I work with incredible people. Okay. I have a very big passion for this work. My mission is to decolonize the worldview of gender and sexuality. And I do that with like a team of people that just believe in storytelling. We know that stories change hearts and minds. Stories can reach an audience that wouldn't otherwise listen to such a DEI topic or an LGBTQ plus person's experience. And so do it all, because it's just like what we're born to do. It's
That's
great.
right. That's right. And that's why I started this, Storytellers.
Right.
Is to make sure that, on our end, it's around mental health.
Yeah.
And to make sure that people understand other people's stories so you can relate.
Yep.
It's just sharing that piece to plant seeds, maybe like it'd be okay for me to go get help because I heard that person did, or, things like that. So I love what you're doing. I feel like every person's journey to where they are now, like when they're really doing something that they're passionate about, starts somewhere. How did yours get started? And can you tell us where you grew up too?
I will, because I know my accent sounds very English.
Yes.
Yes. But I consider myself not only an American, but a Texan.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah, so I grew up in the UK. And just for context, I'll share, I'm about to turn 46 in July.
Okay. I just turned 46.
Did you?
Yes,
Isn't it? It's like the best age.
I love it.
I love getting older. It's really good. So I was born in 77, like you must have been too, maybe.
Yes, I was. I know, good year.
So I graduated college with a degree in psychology. I left England in 1998, and I haven't lived there since. So I went to Bangladesh and volunteered there for 6.5 months, and then Portugal for a year, and then I fell in love and married a US Marine, and so that's who brought me to the States. So I came to Houston, Texas, 23 years ago. My marriage took an end, let's say, and in 2004, and at the same time I came flying out the closet as a lesbian. Okay. Today I now re-identified as bisexual in 2012, and I had been working in the nonprofit sector up to that point, doing marketing, media, fundraising. I've always had a passion for human rights and equality and for speaking up for people. In fact, going back to England, I always did volunteered as a kid, encouraged by my parents. We had some elderly people that lived behind our house. And I remember at the age of about 7 or 8, and we get snowed in, and the elderly people couldn't get to the shop. And so my siblings and I knocked on their doors to see if we could go get them bread and milk and that kind of stuff. And so service was always just a natural part of my upbringing. And then hence obviously volunteering in Bangladesh. By the time I was in Houston, I was working for an HIV/AIDS organization. And so that's really what put me into the LGBTQ plus community. And after my divorce and coming out as lesbian, I really felt, you know, a calling for advocacy for the LGBTQ plus community. So by 2010, I was working in corporate social responsibility for a bank, focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I decided that I wanted to progress my career as a filmmaker. And so that's when I went to New York from Houston. And then the next 9 years, I was in New York and DC. And that's where I made my documentaries, Transgender at War and in Love, that's available on the New York Times, and Transmilitary, which is the feature documentary that's also available on all streaming platforms. And I made those films because I realized that transgender people were still banned from the US military. So the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell allowed lesbian, gay, and bi people to serve, but trans people were still banned. And I think that that's kind of reflective of, even within the LGBTQ plus community, we often kind of lump gender identity and sexual orientation together, but they're quite separate. They're related but separate. And so,
can you expand on that?
Sure.
You know, for our audience that doesn't understand, and just to really help us be more clear.
Sure. So do you want a 101 on the difference between gender and sexual orientation?
You know, I think so. I think a lot of people maybe are afraid to ask because we should know. And, you know, I think that maybe some people are feeling confused. You know, maybe especially some of the older generation. You know?
No, I would love to dive deep. And in fact, can I just pull out this as well?
Yes,
because
absolutely. Please do.
For those people that are if you have questions and you're afraid to ask somebody, then hopefully my book can help. And the title is Are Bisexuals Just Greedy? Animated answers for all people who simply want to understand the spectrum of being LGBTQ+. And this book came about because I created an animation explaining the difference between the words cisgender and transgender. So cisgender being spelt with a C, so CIS gender, and then transgender. And I think most people have heard the word transgender more than they've heard cisgender before, So I made that animation that you can easily find on YouTube, or maybe we can put in the show notes. And basically it's talking about how when babies are born, currently, a medical professional looks at their biological sex and determines it's a boy for, male parts, or it's a girl for female parts. But that's not true for everybody, because most people grow up feeling aligned. So say you've been assigned female at birth based on your body. Most people grow up also feeling like you have a female gender. And then most people who've been assigned male at birth grow up feeling like they've got a male gender. But it's not true. Some people may be assigned female at birth, but grow up feeling a gender expression of more masculine. And some people may be assigned male at birth, but grow up feeling more feminine. And then, of course, there's a whole spectrum in between. And 1 in 100 babies are born intersex, meaning that they have any combination of male and female sex tissue, chromosomes, and hormones. In the same way, gender's not a binary either. Some people feel not 100% male or 100% female in their gender. And so what I in a very kind of bare bones 101 to get this is, if you imagine that we say your biological sex is typically visible between your legs, but your gender identity is wired in your brain, and your sexual orientation is a complex network all throughout your body. And so those three things are really quite separate and distinct, but they kind of relate in terms they help figure out what labels we're going to use to express who we are. So full disclosure, I am a cisgender woman, which means that I was assigned female at birth, and I've grown up with my gender identity feeling like I am a woman. So that means cis means aligned in Latin. My friend, Layla, who's in my book and in my films, she was assigned male at birth, but growing up, she knew that she was a woman. And so trans means to cross, and so that's a Latin word. So she would identify as a transgender woman. I would identify as a cisgender woman. So we just happen to be born with different body parts, but we've got the same gender in our head. And as I say in my animation, and now you can stop thinking about our private parts, thank you very much. And Layla, my trans friend, she identifies as straight. She's married to her husband, Logan. who also happens to be trans. But Logan and Layla identify as straight, whereas I identify as bisexual, which means that gender is not necessarily a barrier, let's say, or a component of who I have the capacity to be attracted to.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean I'm attracted to everybody.
Yeah, right.
But it just means that I'm open to dating somebody of any gender expression and or any biological parts, right? It's like I fall in love with a person more than I do, okay, it's got to be a man or a woman or anything like that. A lot of people would say that the label for that would be pansexual, and I would agree. I think for me, bisexual and pansexual are like non-identical twins when it comes to language. And then I also would feel like queer is a comfortable word for me too. But from an advocacy perspective, I will say I'm bisexual first because there's a B in LGBT, and there's a lot of stigma and stereotypes against the bi community, even though most people out of the lesbian, gay and bi community, 56.8% of that community identifies as bisexual, compared to just around 14% of lesbian and 21% of gay. Okay. And so there's actually more bi people than lesbian and gay people, but we're less visible. So for me, it's like, I'm going to say B because I want to be seen and heard and represent everybody.
Right. Okay. I want to go back to you also saying the word queer.
Yeah.
Is that something that is okay for someone like me to say? Because I feel like that's a word that maybe I understand it.
Right.
But I also feel like there was a time when maybe it wasn't okay. And is it okay now?
Yeah. Now, are you saying, is it okay for you to say it for yourself or for someone else?
For someone else.
For someone else. That's a great question.
Okay.
First of all, no matter what labels we have, no one should ever choose somebody else's label for them. So it's not fair to describe somebody as queer unless they have told you that they are queer.
Okay.
Like, let them use that word first. Because you're absolutely right. Like, historically, that word was very damaging. And that's going back, decades where it was used like queer bashing. Like, people, the LGBTQ plus community faces a lot of violence against them and still does. But it was used as a word, like as a sneer, like in the same way we wouldn't use other words to describe somebody else because it's not appropriate. But I think that there's a large portion of our community who's now reclaimed that word. And so that's why we have the LGBTQ plus or LGBTQIAP plus. I could tell you what that means too. But so I would say if someone else uses it, that's okay, but don't use it without someone's consent.
Okay, that's good to know, because I was on this podcast and he said, he identified as queer. And I don't even remember saying that word. And then as we were talking, I said that like in a way that was obviously fine. And then I kind of stood back and we paused the recording because I was like, wait, is that okay? And he's like, oh yeah, because I just said it. So it was okay that you said it.
Correct.
But I was really, I had to pull back because he said it and then I said it and I'm like, wow, I've never said that before.
I think in some ways, and it is different, like there's a certain word that begins with N that some people would use for Black people, and I will never say that. Even if somebody else claims it, it's not my place as a white woman to say that. Yeah. But if somebody wants to use that for themselves, then that's absolutely their place. But I will not take that. I think queer is slightly different. Okay. Where a queer person can give you permission to say it and it's different from that word completely. And I'll also say that queer can be used for a sexual identity and or a gender identity. And I think for me, it's like queer just means that I'm just not in that straight binary box, that binary bucket. Right. I jokingly say, I know on the outside I look like a very femme presenting woman, but on the inside I feel like I'm a unicorn dressed up as a pirate wench. It's like I'm really flaming and queer on the inside. And so I have to use language to help people see me and to get that. Yeah. But I'm so pleased you raised that because it is so important to know not only the words, but when to use them. And like one of the bottom lines is don't use words that someone else hasn't given you to help you describe them. The same way with pronouns. Don't guess someone's pronouns. Ask what their pronouns are. Because sometimes your expression may not match what pronouns feel comfortable for you. So yeah, we're never, like, my book is an explainer book, but it's not to help you understand what label to use for someone else. It's more to understand the label that someone is giving you to use.
And I think it's so important because even with my children, you know, my son, he got in trouble at school because he wasn't using the right pronouns for somebody. And he's like, Mom, I don't even know. This is so different. He's like, I didn't mean to do it. And then he felt bad because then he got in trouble. And so, you know, I said the same thing. I was like, it's always to ask. And if, you know, you don't say it correctly, then just say, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't know that. Yeah. And I think that, and you tell me if that's a great way to handle it, because, you know, I think we're all learning to some extent.
Yeah. I would say there's several different steps. So say, for example, you meet somebody and their pronouns are not clear. The first thing to do is to like volunteer your own pronouns. Don't make the assumption that just because how I look and sound that you know what my pronouns are. So I might say, you know, hey, I know you can't tell just by looking at someone or how they sound, but I'm going to tell you that my pronouns are she, her. Would it be okay for you, or would you like to share your pronouns with me too? And then they'll tell you their pronouns. And let's say they say they, them. Say, oh, great. Thank you for letting me know. And then I think because we're not used to necessarily using these pronouns in a conscious way, because side note, they, them has actually been used as a single pronoun for hundreds of years, if not thousands, because even Shakespeare used they as a singular pronoun. If you've got someone coming to fix your dishwasher, but you're not quite sure what time they're going to show up, you've just used a they as a singular pronoun. Like, it rolls off our tongue. So a lot of it is about increasing our consciousness and our awareness of it. So let's say somebody has shared their pronouns, they, them, and then you accidentally use the wrong pronouns. Yes, you can apologize and acknowledge it, but don't make it a big deal. Don't make it about you. Okay. Just say, like, hey, oh, I'm so sorry, they, them, and then carry on. Because when you make it about you and how, oh my God, it's so hard. Yes, it's hard, but that person doesn't need you to know how hard it is for them to be seen. You know, it's like there's a point where, okay, it might be difficult for you, but that's for you to keep inside, because saying how difficult it is doesn't help empower that other person. So I think acknowledging, you know, oh, I'm sorry, use the wrong pronoun. I meant they, them, and then carry on. So you're not rubbing salt into that wound.
Right. Yeah. And I totally agree. And those are things that I'm actually trying to work with in our family, because we were also raised, or I was, to apologize a lot. Yeah. And then I heard my kids apologizing a lot for everything. So it's saying, what do we apologize for? You know, there are things, you know, you don't need to apologize if I ask you to go brush your teeth and you didn't. You just need to say, thanks for reminding me, Mom. Yeah. But in this situation, it's absolutely a time to like apologize, and then, like you said, and then move on.
And then move on. Exactly. Don't go into like, you know, I'm really trying my best and really sorry. It's just so hard. It's just so new and everything else. Don't say that to the person that you've just hurt, because they've got enough to deal with. You know? Right, they do. Don't say, you can go write that in your journal, or you can go confide in someone who's not going to be hurt by that.
Yeah. And there was a time like I would feel really guilty about it. And then my friends, her children are now they and them. Yeah. And even she, my friend who goes by, she will get confused on her own children. You know, she's like, oh, they and them, you know? Yeah. And so it doesn't have to be a thing. No. It's just move on from it, like you're saying.
Yeah. Because our brains have been hardwired to, and it's hardwired to pick up cues, you know? So, you know, I know people who use they, them pronouns, but because their voice is what society says is so feminine, and their gender expression is what society says is so feminine, they'll get misgendered a lot, because one, you know, your brain is making an assumption. So again, that's why it comes down to like raising your awareness, raising your consciousness. Like, I think there are 4 steps towards allyship, and one is like know yourself, like self-awareness. When was the last time you even questioned your own gender? How have you ever asked yourself, how do I know I'm the gender that I am? You know, and then you kind of like do that discovery. So 1 is know yourself, and then 2 is know others. Like, but you can't know other people if you don't know yourself. And then you've got courageous action and collaboration, you know, being kind and being courageous. And so you can kind of go into these different steps. And I think knowing the LGBTQ plus community, understanding pronouns, understanding gender and sexual orientation is becoming increasingly important because, you know, 1 in 5 Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ. And so it's only getting more, and it's not new. It's actually, since humans existed, like thousands of years ago, people were queer, but it kind of got knocked out of us in society a few hundred years ago. And now I just feel like there's this re-emergence of humans refusing to stay in these binary buckets. And so I love knowing, I'm not surprised to know that you've got a friend whose kids are queer.
Yeah, same.
And it's not a trend. It just is who they are.
100%, you know, and she's not my only friend.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel like, one, you know, I wanted to talk to you about so many things, but thank you for explaining it, because I still think that there are a lot of people who are confused. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being confused. And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking the questions.
Right.
You know, because if you really care and you're genuine, asking questions and saying, hey, I don't know how to handle this, or can you explain more about this? I think that that actually allows us to open up the conversation and learn. And then I think that there is that courageous action of saying, hey, how do I say this, or how do I approach this, or how do I call my friend? You know, that's courageous. And it's not making it about you. It's saying, I care and I want to know more.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, being questioning about your own identities and how to interact with people who are LGBTQ+, I think is a superpower. I think everybody should be doing that. Because I think a lot more people would actually identify as not straight or not binary if they gave themselves permission to seek it out or to understand what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into the mental health aspect of this, because I know it's affecting a lot of people. And I'd like to know a little bit, when you decided to get a divorce and then start identifying as lesbian and then bisexual, was there a road for you where it was really hard and trying to understand who you were, or did you always know that you felt like this and then you were just like, I'm free?
Yeah, it's great. First of all, I'll say I'm extremely lucky because I have a very supportive family, and they never gave me pushback or question. Like, I wasn't at risk of homelessness or violence or any of those things that a lot of LGBTQ plus people face. So I was living in Houston. My marriage wasn't healthy, and so I knew I needed to leave, and I was in that process of leaving. And in the last 6 to 10 months of the end of my marriage is when it kind of like opened up to me. It wasn't like I'd been smothering attraction to people of the same gender before. Like in college, I'd kissed a few of my girlfriends, but I hadn't even thought more about it. And so I was never like denying a part of me. It just wasn't like a switch that had been completely flipped on, you know? And so I was living in Houston and very much within the queer community, working for an HIV/AIDS organization. So I was constantly around people who were LGBTQ+. And back then, like we're talking about nearly 20 years ago, we used very binary language back then. It was just lesbian and gay, and I knew a few trans people, and I knew some gay men who were also drag queens. Like that was kind of my community back then. Things have changed dramatically. Right. And so after my marriage, I met and fell madly in love with a woman, a cisgender woman, and we were together for close to 2 years. And I felt so happy and loved in that relationship. And my sister said to me, but Fiona, don't you miss sex? I'm like, Fiona, it's the best sex I've ever had. So no, it was great. And so I just immediately thought, oh, I'm gay, I'm lesbian. The word lesbian never sat comfortably with me because there is a culture that's tied to that word that I didn't feel like I belonged. So gay was like the easiest word. I didn't even consider bisexual. And back then, I myself had a lot of biphobia and bistigma. And I know I'm going to get emotional talking about this because it actually has come up with a friend of mine this morning whose story I want to share with you. But it's like I knew maybe 1, 2 people who said they were bi, but I was like, oh God, you know, can't you be just be gay? You know, it's like, why would you want to be half straight? And now it's nothing like that at all. And so when I came out, my parents were surprised because I hadn't shown any signs of being gay. You know, I remember my dad saying something like, but you always had posters of Joe McIntyre. I loved New Kids on the Block. So Joe was my guy. I was going to marry Joe McIntyre.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
One day Joe McIntyre needs to know I was going to marry him. Probably good that we didn't, but I was obsessed. Like I was growing up in the UK. I thought, I'm going to go to America and marry Joe McIntyre. But anyway, so they were like, you always like boys as a teenager. I'm like, I know, but now I've discovered this. And it's like, this is kind of reflective. Things change. Life changes for all of us. You're not, I mean, many queer people have known since they were like 3 or 4 years old. But I'm not one of those people. And so I kind of came out at the age of around 27. And for the next 7 or 8 years or so, I primarily only dated cisgender women. And then when I got to New York, and it's not New York's fault, I just happened to be in New York, but it was like 2012, and I was single again. Like, that's the thing. Still trying to find the one relationship. And I only want one relationship with one person as well. I'm just open to any gender. But I was like single, and I might get invited on a date with a guy. And I realized the only reason I was saying no was because I'd labeled myself lesbian or gay. But if I was actually honest with myself, I was still attracted. I was attracted to that guy. And then I had this moment of panic, thinking, oh shit, like, am I straight? Like, I don't want to be straight. That's not, I've had this whole identity as being gay. And so then I realized, hang a minute, no, still attracted to women. Oh, there's a B in LGBT. And I was like, oh gosh. And then it was like this sinking feeling, because in Houston, I was the female Grand Marshal for the Gay Pride Parade, or Queer Pride Parade, in 2009. Like, I was very active in terms of advocating for our equality. So I had this moment of fear, thinking all those people are going to think I was lying all along, because I had to do so much work to convince them that I was gay, because I'd been previously married to a man. And they're going to think that, you know, I'm just like, they're not going to trust me. That's what I felt, I think, when it came down to. I felt like they weren't going to trust me and I was going to lose friends. So I told a few people who were all extremely supportive, a couple of whom are seen with the label gay, but confided in me that actually if they're a bit bi too, but they're not out, or don't use that word. And that was like my first instance of realizing, wow, this is a thing. Like, there's a lot of gay and lesbian people out there who actually are bisexual and won't say it.